Thank you very much. Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be and speak here. Thanks a lot to organizers for the invitation. It's fun to be in Columbus again. I was for some time a postdoc here, which was 7 more years ago. Anyway, it's fun to be in Columbus again, and I am very impressed by the conference, and I should say that you guys are all doing an amazing job. And aside from great math, talk to each other, have fun, celebrate your success. There are not that many opportunities in mathematics to celebrate your own success, so enjoy it while it's there. You really should be proud of yourselves. You're doing a great job and certainly enjoy research. It's fun. I hope you'll continue, go to graduate school, become professors, do whatever you aspire to. So before I start my talk, I was asked by the department to say a couple of words. Minnesota has just introduced a new journal specifically for undergraduate mathematicians, specifically to publish research in undergraduate math. And given all the amazing results you've had, you might consider publication. So this is a very good venue. It's open access, which means that everybody, whether or not the library buys your journal, it doesn't have to. Everybody can see your research online. And trust me, there is a very big difference between having published work and having a hidden work or something like that. OK? So I have some flyers here passed to me by the department. I'll just pass them. If you're interested, take one. If not, pass to the next person, something like that. All right? I wouldn't bother you, but I'm kind of the last person. So if I put them on the desk, I'm sure you'll run to the dinner rather than actually take some. All right. So let's get to math. I'm going to talk today about the localization of waves, which is part of the subject of partial differential equations. And to start, let me talk about the simplest possible vibration, the simplest possible wave, which is a one-dimensional string vibration, which you have certainly either studied in the class of ordinary differential equations or in the class of music as a guitar string vibration, or you haven't studied it at all, but you've seen it. You've certainly seen a vibration of a string. So as you'll soon learn, any kind of wave, any kind of vibration can be decomposed into a linear combination, into a sum or difference of something that we call eigenfunctions, which are solutions of the problem. You have a second derivative minus second derivative of your function phi equals some number lambda times phi. And since I'm assuming that we are talking about the guitar string or some other string which is fixed at the ends, it means that I'm taking phi at 0 and phi at the end, which I'm denoting by L, equal to 0. So the question is to find sort of both phis and lambdas, both eigenfunctions and eigenvalues. This is really an analog of a matrix eigenvalue problem, if you are more familiar with that. So the question is to find both eigenfunctions and eigenvalues, which would furnish the answers to this. Now, all right, so you are solving for phi, and you know that the second derivative is a constant times the same function, which should suggest you the answers whose function, after differentiating twice, spits out itself times minus 1. Sines and cosines, right? Fantastic. So it immediately suggests you an answer. You are a sine or a cosine. Since I'm saying it's a constant times the function, it's sine or cosine of square root of lambda x. First differentiation will spit out square root of lambda. Second one, lambda itself. And so you have a combination of sines and cosines. Now, the next level, you are taking, you know that you want phi at 0 equals 0 and phi at L equals 0 too, which means that cosines are ruled out, right? Sine has 0 at 0, cosine doesn't. So it cannot possibly be a cosine. So it means that you end up with sines, and the other boundary condition, the phi of L equals 0, will give you some values of lambda. So if you've never seen this before, it might come as part of the surprise that not every lambda can be possibly taken. So the number eigenvalues are countable. You cannot take any number in the world as an eigenvalue. It's not like you stick in any lambda and you will solve this problem. No. And that is because your string kind of has to come back. since it has 0 at one end and 0 at another end, and it looks like a sine, you cannot take 2.5 loops in some sense. You will not end up at 0. So it has to, go down 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. It cannot do 2.5 times because, again, you cannot cut at a random place. You need to end up at 0. That gives you the countable number of lambdas. So lambdas go kind of as integers, renormalized, and the functions are sines. So the moral to learn from here so far is that whenever you talk about a wave or a vibration in general, real eigenfunctions are all that you need to know. Otherwise, waves are sort of combinations of eigenfunctions. Number 2, an eigenfunction looks sort of like sine. That's what a wave looks like. And in particular, it's sort of uniformly distributed through the domain. What I mean by this, it doesn't stay at 0 for too long time. It can cross 0, but it has to go down or go up again. It doesn't vanish, for a significant amount of time. It doesn't stay at 0 for a significant amount of time. It's sort of doing its way within uniformly through the string. All right. So this is dimension 1. Now you're getting somewhat more complicated. This is already the musical instrument, which probably not everybody knows, which is cajon. But basically what I'm talking about is a vibration of a rectangular plate. I couldn't find a picture of a rectangular drum. It's a pity no one plays that. But people do play cajon, which is kind of that way. So we are speaking about the vibration of now a rectangular plate. Well, what do? Instead of the second derivative, you have now second derivative in x plus second derivative in y. It's a two-dimensional problem, so you have to add the other dimension. But since the scene is perfectly rectangular, since your system is kind of, perfectly almost symmetric in x and y, the length is somewhat different, but otherwise it's the same ball game. It's natural to expect that your solutions are going to separate variables, which means that any wave is a product of two functions, one in x and one in y. So you can sort of completely separate variables because your domain, looks the same wherever is the cut. And indeed, you can do that. So I'm going to run through somewhat quickly now. If you've seen it, it's going to be familiar in the class of PDEs. If not, never mind, trust me on this. But basically, from this separation of variables, you substitute into your initial problem. And what you see, so now skip that, look here. What you see is that basically you end up with two problems of the exact same type as before. So what you end up is with phi1 satisfying the same one-dimensional problem as before. Second derivative equals lambda 1 times phi1. And phi2 satisfies the same problem as before for the other guy. So basically, you end up exactly with the same problem as before. You have the exact same sign solutions as before. You multiply the sign in x by the sign of y, and that's your set of answers. So all your waves on a cajon, all the waves on a rectangular plate are again sine or cosine-ish. They all look like products of sines, essentially. And once again, the moral of the story is that they all look sort of uniformly distributed through the plate in the sense that they do not vanish for a long time. They keep going in the same way no matter where you catch them. So this might suggest to you that this is always the situation, and plus the word wave might suggest to you that this is always the situation, right? Because whenever we talk about waves, we kind of imagine this uniform going on, at least in the absence of resistance. You always imagine that the wave will kind of continue going up and down and so on and so forth in any point of your domain. This is wrong, surprisingly wrong. And as a matter of fact, physicists and engineers knew for a long time by now that in the presence of fairly complicated geometry, it's possible that the waves localize. So instead of a rectangular, on rectangle you have still your old picture over here. But instead of the rectangle, I'm now going to take a drum which has this shape. This is the boundary of the drum. I haven't found a real drum like this, so you'll have to stick to my picture. But imagine that's a drum. So the problem is that the vibration on such a drum can have a picture basically like the one you can see over here. So it would be essentially vanishing in the rest of the domain. It would be very large in a very small portion of the initial domain. This is what's called localization. So it basically gets confined to a small portion of the original boundary, of the original domain. But then there are all kinds of questions coming from this is, why does it happen at the first place? To which subregions does it get localized? I mean, here you can sort of see the subregion separate, but would there be an eigenfunction over here, or would there be an eigenfunction over here, or somewhere else? For which frequencies? Because for different lambdas, the behavior is different, and for some, you still see this sine, cosine-ish picture, and then for some, you see this localization. And finally, how severely, in the sense that I'm saying that this is vanishing, it doesn't really, it's kind of still bubbling there. And this is large, but again, what does large mean, right? So how big is the difference between big and small? Other than for many, many ad hoc works, because of the obvious importance of this question in engineering, mathematicians didn't know much up until very recently. But that has never prevented physicists from making progress. And in particular, based on this effect of localization, they have built quite recently this noise abatement wall. So this is a real noise abatement wall on the highway around Paris. And it's based basically on the same picture as what I showed you before when I said I don't know the drum. I kind of lied, this is the drum. So what happens is that they figured out, we cannot, we don't know for which frequencies we have localization, but if we code it once, we can maybe reproduce it at smaller and smaller scales, the same geometry, to get localization for a range of frequencies. And this way, basically, they trap the sound, because you want to trap the sound coming from highway. So the moral is that you don't have to build a thick wall. You have to build a complicated wall, but an intelligently complicated one, because you want to really trap at all the frequencies possibly coming from the highway. So this has been super successful. This wall is, to this date, 17 times better in noise abatement performance than any other known one. It's kind of expensive, so it didn't catch up. It's also easy to destroy, so there are many engineering problems with it. But mathematically or physically speaking, the idea is very powerful. So when they started talking to me about this, when the physicists first approached me with this problem, my first idea as a mathematician was that maybe I cannot understand why this is happening in the first place, but I can prove that the effect is sufficiently robust. Normally, perturbation theorems are kind of easier to handle, if you are not particularly ambitious, at least, and at that time, we were trying our hand. And my idea was that, if I see how it perturbs, if I see some sort of robustness, I will at least understand what governs the effect. Now, this is utterly wrong. There is no, small changes matter. And to show you this, and also to show that the effect is applicable to other situations, let me show this small movie. So first of all, localization is also visible in the case of the airplanes. So this is a happily flying plane in which we will soon see a pretty severe localization at the ends of the wings and at the tail. You can see how severely it's actually going off. And when I asked them about the perturbation question, they showed me another movie, which is this one. So you are taking a healthy airplane, a big normal size civil airplane. And what they're doing is they're attaching this small, tiny object, which is just, a tiny change of geometry from the mathematical point of view. Imagine the scale of the airplane. This is kind of the human size. So this is a change of geometry of the initial domain. We look from a distance in 5 seconds, so this is the same. You don't even kind of notice it. And it introduces pretty severe localization, you will see in 5 seconds, to the cockpit. Just from that. And then things go bad, but we won't show scary movies here. So this is another example of localization. And yet another one is as follows. So when, again, when we started working on this, when I started thinking about the sense, it was actually right after my stay here at the Ohio State. And at the time, we were working with Vladimir Mazia on a biharmonic problem. So the biharmonic problem refers to a fourth-order differential equation. It's like fourth derivatives instead of the second ones. Laplacian of u in hard dimension, and dimension 1 is just the first derivative. So the biharmonic problem governs the vibration of any sufficiently rigid plate. So when I showed you the second slide, I kind of cheated slightly. Cajon would be vibrating according to biharmonic equation. And basically, if you have a soft drum, this is Laplacian, or soft string. If you have something sufficiently rigid, like these plaster walls, or these squares, or bulkheads of the ship, so covering of the airplanes, if you have a sufficiently rigid material, it vibrates according to the biharmonic equation. So it's one of the most prominent objects in structural engineering. And what we learned back then was kind of quite shocking. When they started talking about me, they showed me this example of fractal wall and all the emerging complicated examples, and it looked like there is an immense complexity needed to introduce localization. It's not clear why it happens, but it happens in the presence of some absolutely crazy domains. It turned out that this is not the case with the bi-Laplacian. So you take a rectangle, just a rectangle. You have your sines, cosines as usual. And then you clamp just one point. So you add one point to the boundary here, just one point, and that's it. You add one point to the boundary. Physically, you stick nail in the middle of your bench. And what you see is a severe localization on the left and on the right of the point for the first 200 eigenfunctions. So you basically see complete mechanical separation between the left and the right portion of the plate, just by one nail. And here you cannot even pretend that something is stopping the wave from propagating. Seriously, there is like one point clamped here. So why is it not going through? It was really a mystery. So basically, physically speaking, the effect is that if you stick a nail in the strategical place of a bench, one person could be jumping on the bench, and the other person wouldn't feel it at all. So that's the most obvious application in engineering. So yeah, imagine one of them jumping. They're actually at the exact correct distance. It's that example from the previous picture is exactly that bench. So if you stick a nail over here, it would work like a charm. Anyway, so the next example of localization that I do want to mention to you might sound like the most exotic one, but trust me, it's kind of becoming the most important one in condensed matter physics these days. It's localization of quantum states of electrons. So it's basically, we are now speaking about waves of matter. You have probably heard in the courses of physics, at least to some extent, that basically even matter nowadays is perceived in part as propagation of waves, as a wave structure. And from that point of view, Anderson has observed almost 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago actually, that in the presence of sufficient disorder, the states would localize. And what it means is that the current doesn't go from left to right. So what used to be a conductor becomes an insulator, in a sense. So this is a different type of localization in many, many ways, or so it was thought to be. Mathematically speaking, we are not talking about a bad domain. We are talking about a complicated potential. So the domain is anything you want it to be, a square, a rectangle, an infinite domain. But the equation is now Laplacian plus v, the Schrödinger equation, where v is just some function by which you multiply phi. So the operator is different. It's Laplacian plus a function by which you multiply. In the presence of sufficient disorder in v, in the presence of a sufficiently complicated v, what you see is exactly this picture. So the eigenfunctions, and this is many eigenfunctions in one picture. So every single one of them is basically one bump. So they really very severely localize to small portions of the original domain. And Anderson won a Nobel Prize for it in 1977. The concept, the issue of Anderson localization has become one of the most studied in the entire condensed matter physics and in mathematics as a matter as well, though from a completely different angle. but it's still not completely understood. And we do have to resort to indignity of numerical computations, according to Anderson. All right. So a small disclaimer for those few in the audience who might have seen it. This is not the classical problem of Anderson localization as it became in mathematics, in the sense that I'm talking about a finite domain, I'm talking about the specific spatial locations and things like this. It's really, the word is almost coined by now for a different problem, as a matter of fact. So I'm trying to be careful. All right. So back to our results. Now a theorem. I know it looks scary, but you know, we are mathematicians, even though you are pretending not yet to be. So a theorem has to be in the talk. All right. So basically, I'm speaking of any elliptic. This was our first result, which started, you know, mathematical research on this matter. So take any elliptic operator, Laplacian, Schrödinger, bi-Laplacian, whatever you like. Second derivatives, you know, think of your favorite one. Whichever you liked from the previous part of this talk, take the one you like. Take any domain. So what we have observed first, what we have proved, is a quite straightforward and yet, you know, new result. It's amazingly that it's a new result, which turned out to be extremely powerful. So we proved that for any eigenfunction, independently on lambda, for any eigenfunction whatsoever, for any wave, you have it point-wise controlled if you normalize by a maximum, but that's just normalization. So you have it point-wise controlled by the eigenvalue lambda times function u of x. And the magic of this fact is, well, twofold. One, it's point-wise, so it's for every x. And two, this function u is the same for every eigenfunction. Remember, you saw the sines and cosines. Even more complicated, you saw the, you know, the localized eigenfunctions and things like this. It didn't seem like there is any pattern there. It didn't seem like there is any uniform control. It turns out that there is a uniform head on them, that there is some function u which majorizes all of them. And in particular, in places where u is small, any wave has to dive under it. So in anywhere where the function u is small, everybody has to be small. So it's perceived by waves, it's perceived by eigenfunctions as some additional boundaries, or at least some pressure points where it has to dive under, for any operator under any circumstances. What's even more magical, function u is a pretty straightforward to find. It's a solution to Lu equals 1. So what it means is that, or Laplacian u equals 1, whatever is your operator, what it means is that it's a deflection under uniform load 1. Because the right-hand side is the load, the u is the deflection. So if you imagine the drum, so imagine a drum of, I don't know, complicated shape or something like this. What happens is you push it everywhere with load 1, uniformly at all the points. You look at this function u which appears. You look at this mapping. You look at the places where it's small, and it's going to tell you the localization regions, because the places where it's small is the places where phi has to dive under. Any phi has to dive under. So it sort of decouples your domain into independently vibrating regions, at least for a while. So let's see if what I'm saying is actually true in pictures, at least. So these are the first experiments that we made back then. We took the same geometry, but pretty complicated geometry. So there is a bottleneck, there is a crack, and there are 2 points fixed over here. And we took 2 different operators. One is second derivatives, one is fourth derivatives by Laplacian. We look at this landscape function. It's amazingly different for the 2 of them. So on the membrane, you have it sort of pretty shaped up. In particular, there is only one what we call valley. So by valley, I understand for the time being, I mean, eventually there was a mathematical definition, but by the time being, I understand basically value of the landscape as you would think about it. It's the place where u is small. It's the line where u is small. The line which we promised would cut out localization regions. So for Laplacian, there is one line over here, and there are 2 regions, respectively. And for the bi-Laplacian, there are, well, I'm not going to count lines, but point is there are 4 regions. So it's a different situation. Let's see if the eigenfunctions follow it. So this is for now without any vibrations. This is just, you know, a landscape drawn up. And indeed, for the Laplacian, you see basically two regions shaped up. So all the eigenfunctions are in one of the two regions, some in the small one, some in the big one. And for the bi-Laplacian, you can see four regions shaped up. And really all the eigenfunctions but this one actually, and I'll talk about this one in a few minutes. So all the eigenfunctions but this one are in one of the four regions. So it looks like this landscape scene works absolutely perfectly. And so this is so far numerical. I mean, well, the theorem is actually a real mathematical theorem. This was a numerical experiment. And then we set up the real experiment. And actually, it's a vibration of plate. It's the one for the bi-Laplacian. It has been set up in École Polytechnique in France. It was actually an undergraduate project there. It's just that, you know, a group of undergraduates approached the physicist with whom I worked there to suggest a project, so he did. And, well, amazingly, it grew up into something much bigger. So they actually found, you know, people in experimental physics to run with us. I was on math side, Marcel was on the physics side. And by now, it has grown up into an absolutely adult project. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of funny to see undergraduates entering the graduate school with a paper in science, but they honestly did their work. I mean, it actually was an amazing job, and it was an undergraduate project to start with. Anyway, so we took the very same geometry as what you saw in the previous slides, and we did the real experiment. So you can see a plate over here. It's a 10 by 10, something like that. Instead of drawing the bottleneck or something, what they did, they clamped nails. If they're sufficiently close, that kind of draws the geometry for you. This is the landscape function. This is the numerics. This is the actual situation. So this is the uniform load one. As a matter of fact, they vacuumed with uniform pressure at all points. It was easier to do. So it's a load minus one. They look at the landscape, and then, sure enough, all the vibrations satisfy the landscape lines. So you can see basically this is the numerics, this is the prediction, this is the reality. So it's pretty closely following. And it really obeys the landscape lines. So that magical function u, which can be found on total experimental basis, which is also pretty easy to compute mathematically as a solution of Laplace u equals 1, it really gives you a very good idea about the decoupling into regions. So now I'll have to complexify the situation a bit and remind you that I'm saying that u is the same for everybody, which is true. But remember that you actually have lambda, the eigenvalue, on the right-hand side. And the eigenvalues grow. So they, you know, the frequency grows. It's a growing sequence. So at some point, even though the right-hand side is the same, it's going to be multiplied by such a large number that the eigenfunction doesn't care anymore. So basically, slowly but surely, this network doesn't matter anymore. It's like you have a hat, and this hat is raising with the frequency. And at the places where it didn't raise too much, you know, if your hat is really wrinkled, at the place where wrinkles are still down, it's still going to hold. You will not have a wave propagating. But in the places where it's raised sufficiently, it's going to go through. And in particular, eventually, everybody is going to go through completely. Everybody is going to be delocalized, which is coherent with the physical reality of it. All right. So now a real fun experiment. You know that as baby games for regions, blah, blah, maybe we faked it. So now an experiment with random potential with Anderson localization. So at this scale, you really cannot cheat on it. So we take, again, the equation is somewhat different. It's second derivatives plus a potential multiplied by the function. It's fun to take a really, really complicated potential, random in this case. So this is the way it looks. It was randomly chosen by the computer. And while we look at the eigenfunctions, the first 5 look this way. You see the pictures over here. I don't know if you can. I cannot tell from the potential, you know, where there would be localization, whether there would be localization, you know, why in the world it's in this particular places, for which modes would it be. I mean, really, there is nothing you can read from this picture offhand. Right? But let's see if the landscape helps. So this is the same potential sort of 2D projection. Red is high, blue is small. Those of you who've done MATLAB know the code. This is the landscape function solution to L equals 1. The one is blown up uniformly with pressure 1. Again, red is high, blue is small, so you can see clear values here. And this is the same landscape function, a 2D projection. And here we have drawn the values. Again, values being basically whatever places where u is small, the places which are going conjecturally to hold eigenfunctions. So just consider it drawn by hand. And let's see if the waves really obey that. So here you have the network of values. I just took away colors so that it doesn't bother anyone. So this is just the network of values of u. And again, the prediction is that mysteriously, well, not mysteriously because that's a theorem, but kind of still mysteriously, these are going to be the places where eigenfunctions live. Let's see if I'm saying the truth. This is the first one, exactly where it's promised to be. The second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. So you can see that not only they are following very, very closely, they're sitting exactly in the cells where they promised to be, but they're actually following the cells in the exact shape and the exact features and everything like this. And moreover, remember this hat thing that it's going to elevate eventually. And as it elevates, we are sort of erasing the line. So this means that this line was pretty shallow and it went up already. And the moment the line disappears, the eigenfunction goes through. So if the line has disappeared there, if the right-hand side became too large because the frequency is too large, you have really someone sneaking in right away. But you control both. You know when it's going to sneak in, and you know in which region it's going to be. And just for the fun of it, let's see how long it takes. So this is the movie of the same ones. 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10, 11. So you can see, I can go on and I will go on forever. But the point is that at every single stage, whatever your network has promised is going to hold. And the moment the network opens a little bit, there is a leakage a little bit. And then the moment the network opens substantially, there is a substantial leakage. But at every single stage, the eigenfunction follows exactly in sort of shape and location and everything what your landscape has predicted. And I don't know if you are realizing it, but sort of for a physicist or for a person in numerical mathematics, this is a true magic because there is an infinite number of eigenfunctions. And before, in order to compute where they are localized, one had to actually compute them. All right, you might not need infinite for your purposes, but you might need 90, 100, and something like this. There is no way one could predict, possibly, other than for some simple shapes, where they are going to be located. Like this, you don't have to compute anything but one solution. L equals 1 is really one problem, one solution, not 90 of them. And already one solution gives you the exact partition of the domain into particular regions. And again, as far as experimental physicists are concerned, you don't even need to compute anything. You just take a picture of the landscape function after a uniform blow. You see the partition, and that's your thing. You don't even need to know what is the operator behind it. You don't even need a model. You just don't care about anything. You blow in, you look at the lines. These are going to be lines of the separation. All right. And then it will go on. All right. So now a little bit more magic. Not only the eigenfunctions are localized on the previous picture, not only you have this, large somewhere and basically very, very small elsewhere, but you kind of suspect that they should be exponentially localized in the presence of potential. What I mean by that is that they should be decaying exponentially. This MATLAB picture is so rough that it looks to you like you have something large here and 0 elsewhere. You cannot have 0 for eigenfunction. Even if a tiny little bit, it still has to be sign-ish. Even if you don't see it, even if MATLAB is not sensitive enough to detect it or something like this, the truth is the eigenfunction cannot vanish identically to 0 like an analytic function. So it has to be tiny little bit there. And the question is, well, this tiny little bit is not seen by your naked eye, but it's still a very relevant question, how small or how big it is. It turns out it decreases exponentially, which is a very, very fast rate. I mean, you know, exponential to negative rate, negative power is a very fast decrease. Now, why is that at the first place? Well, let's take a look. Why would we guess that there could possibly be an exponential decay? Well, what happens is as follows, at least in the classical, you know, naive picture in the presence of the potential. Basically, an eigenfunction plays the following game. So let's imagine the one-dimensional situation. You're an eigenfunction. There is a potential. How do you progress? How do you distribute yourself? How do you go through the potential? Well, let's assume that you have an energy level lambda. So your eigenvalue is lambda, which is also, by the way, your energy level from the point of view of physicists. So in blue, I'm drawing everything below lambda. The rest is above lambda. And in black are the values of your potential. So the thing is, if you're an eigenfunction, if you're swimming somewhere in here, if you're swimming in your blue sea, and the potential is below your level, you don't care. You happily swim like a sine or a cosine, and you just go through. On the other hand, if the potential is above your level, you really cannot swim through this if it's above your energy level. What you have to do is you climb it. But as you climb, you get exponentially tired. So it's very, very difficult for you to climb. And with every step, you lose a level of energy in a sense, in computer game sense. And then you basically, by the end of the climb, you lost exponentially your magnitude. That's what's happening. So I was trying to convince a friend who is a computer game designer to actually make a picture for me, but somehow he didn't buy the idea of spending time on this. So you'll have to, you know, use your imagination, imagine yourself a happy eigenfunction swimming through the sea, climbing an unhappy eigenfunction climbing the potential, and that sort of thing. There should be a game like this, right? I mean, swimming with obstacles. I'm kind of not big on computer games, but I think it's a loss if there is none. Anyway, mathematical side of it. So for those of you who have seen some differential equations, I'll be able to explain, you know, what's actually happening. So imagine for a second that your potential V is a constant, just a constant. The thing is, it's very different whether it's a constant bigger than lambda or smaller than lambda. So you're solving second derivatives on phi equals V minus lambda phi. Again, think of V as being a constant. And the thing is, if it's a negative constant, if V minus lambda is negative, if V is below the energy level lambda, you have a negative sign here. And as someone mentioned when I first asked, the answer is sine or cosine, because you differentiate sine once, you get cosine, then cosine, you get minus sine, right? So you get a minus. Same with the other one. But if you have V minus lambda bigger than 0, so if potential is above your energy level, what happens is that the answers are not sines and cosines. The answers are exponents. So it's a dichotomy of two different solutions. It has to do with the fact that, you know, the root from of lambda minus v, I mean, you could write them as sines or cosines. You could write these ones as exponents, but you would be getting a root of a negative number, which is an imaginary number, you know, and there you have to go into complex analysis. So basically, trust me on this if you haven't seen this. If you've seen some complex analysis, you would know these are the same, you know, modulo the sine of the root. But the point is that the sign of the root is very, very important. So once again, when your constant, when v is smaller than lambda, you get sines, cosines, so you happily swim through a sea. When v is bigger than lambda, then the solutions are exponents, so you sort of lose exponentially if you start from the maximum. All right, so that's your computer game. If I'm successful, I'll even show you what it looks like for a real potential. So for example, this is a potential. So if you are at, for example, this energy level, you know, in the well of the potential over here, you are above the potential, so you are happy sine or cosine, that's your swimming. If you are out here, you are going to decay exponentially. It still takes you time to decay, but it's sort of a very, very fast decay, and you are almost perceiving yourself as vanishing. And the same would happen, you know, all the way. So here the same, and so on and so forth. Okay? So in principle, at this point, I have probably convinced you that an exponential decay is not out of question. The problem is that it's much, much more complicated than I'm pretending it to be. In the sense that, first of all, your potential is not a constant. And what happened on the left and on the right matters. You know, your wave is propagating from all the left to all the right. So it's a continuous thing. It has the continuous first derivative. So you cannot disregard what happened 5 seconds ago. So it's more complicated than that. And even more complicated in higher dimensions. So intuitively speaking, here is what can happen, in particular in dimension 2. And this is what actually happens with Anderson localization. So imagine that this is your potential, and there is a fly on it. No fly anymore. So just as that fly, you are trying to go through the potential. It was a useful fly. Can it come back? Anyway, just as the fly, you're kind of flying through the potential. So the black parts are where the potential is 1. The rest is where the potential is 0. I'm just considering, you know, what we call Bernoulli case, 1s and 0s. So what's the difference between pink and gray? Well, none from the point of view of the potential, but what I wanted to show is that it's completely percolating. The thing is, I mean, any point of pink region could be reached from any other point of pink region. So the parts where your potential is 1 are kind of not that often, do not appear all the time. And so what happens, you basically could, you know, go from here, carefully avoiding the obstacles, you know, to get anywhere else. So from that swimming eigenfunction point of view, you could think that, you know, you would be uniformly distributed through the entire pink region, very happily avoiding all the obstacles. Yet you look at reality, and what actually happens is that you are again localized. And again, you know, God knows where. And then many, many other eigenfunctions show the same pattern. So they are localized despite the fact that they could have a room to swim. And again, this is what's actually kind of called Anderson localization. It's not that confinement case where you can obviously see the decay as coming from a well. So this is the case where you could, in principle, go through, but somehow you don't. So what are the reasons? Well, who knows, right? Some intuitive ideas behind that people have developed over the years are, you know, well, one is an eigenfunction, you could be kind of fat. Meaning that eigenfunction has a shape to it. You know, it's a bump, or it's several bumps, but it's bumpy. It has a belly. It cannot go with that huge belly everywhere. So it's possible that the opening is not wide enough for eigenfunction to pass happily, intuitively, right? Another option is that you kind of spend too much time looking for an opening. You know, again, you are an eigenfunction. You go there, you meet an obstacle. You go here, you meet an obstacle. You go over there, you meet an obstacle, and so on and so forth. There are many obstacles after all. And while there is a point of opening, you are not as smart as a human. You are just an eigenfunction. So you don't actually see it. You kind of keep bouncing around, and it's possible that you get so tired being bouncing around, you know, that you decay again for completely different reasons. So all of them are sort of, you know, not as naive possibilities as I'm presenting them to be. This is actually in part what's happening. But the problem is that it's not clear how to quantify it, right? I mean, why would it be happening? Again, you're looking at the potential. There are plenty of openings, you don't know what to do. And from this, you know, energy point of view, you just, at whatever energy you cut it, the picture is the same, because the potential is just 1 and 0. So you can cut it whenever convenient, you'll see the same thing. So what it turns out to be is that the landscape function again comes to play. And what actually happens is, well, these are your familiar modes from 4 slides before. So this is the linear scale. Again, you know, you don't see green looks the same, 0, but it's actually not. It's exponentially small. And when you look at the log scale, so log scale means that one color stands for a power of the exponent. So here at a linear scale, you would see eigenfunction here and only here. At a log scale, you see it e to minus k in different colors. So this is sort of size 1. This is of size e to minus 2. This is of size e to minus 3, and so on. And what you see is that magically the eigenfunction exponentially is controlled again by the landscape. that it sort of drops the value every time in exponential, in log scale, in exponent, every time it crosses the value. And so if it drops the power of exponent every time it crosses the value, of course, it's exponentially decreasing in the long run. But once again, it's carefully controlled by the values of u. So just to convince you that it's really, 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 really that, and really beautiful, let's look at this complicated Bernoulli potential. So here, I mean, I'm drawing somewhat different thing. I'm drawing the what we call logarithmic derivative, gradient of the log. And the feature of logarithmic derivative, so think you are measuring gradient of the log. You are measuring change of the logarithm. So you are measuring change of power. Because if you take log of e to minus k, you are getting exactly k. So you are measuring change of that k. So if k is the same, however big or small it is, you get green or blue-ish. And if the change of k is fast, if you just dropped exponentially, that's where you get red. So the red stands for a big change, for an exponential drop in some sense. So basically, exponential drop not only happens indeed in this picture, and this is this eigenfunction, by the way. So not only it happens, but it happens through a very distinct pattern. And what's magical is that pattern again coincides with the values of u. So this is the bigger picture. Again, red signifies the places of exponential drop of eigenfunction. Blue-green are the places where phi is kind of the same. And gray are the values of the landscape. So you see that red basically perfectly coincides with the values of the landscape. So every time you cross this landscape line, you drop exponentially. And this could not possibly be explained by the only theorem I actually showed you, by the first theorem, because that one is just a pointwise control, right? Phi is less than u. Well, by the time it's exponentially small, it's much less than u. The first time it dropped, it mattered. But the 55th time, you're speaking of e to minus 55. It's so far from u, it couldn't possibly hear it. And so I'll show you almost the real theorem, and it's going to really, really hurt. But I hope, read every third line of it. The point is that we are showing that 1 over u, so the reverse of this thing, the reverse of this landscape, is actually the real potential hurt by the system. So there is this potential which comes from the physical reality, which is basically whatever the field is there, which is what we call v, what comes into the play, into the quantum system. But as far as the eigenfunctions go, the potential, the way they see it, their perception of the potential, they perceive this landscape function u as 1, or rather reciprocal of u. So if you are a mathematician, you look at the model, you have v as a potential, and you say it's a potential, and that's the potential energy, and things like this. But if you're an eigenfunction, and by the way, as a mathematician, as a human, you also see all these openings, where you would pretend to go. But as I said, if you are an eigenfunction, your vision is different. And the thing is, you see a different potential, and it turns out you see exactly this u, exactly this landscape function u, or rather 1 over u. And then there is a big fancy theorem behind it, but it basically says that there is a distance that you can describe in terms of 1 over u. This is the definition of the distance. So it's large where u is small, or 1 over u is large. And that's the distance which you have to travel. Remember that concept that you have to climb and you exponentially lose? So this is exactly that. And then you are exponentially losing according to the distance from the point of view of this potential u. Okay, and this is what's actually happening. And now I'll skim through many, many, many things, but I will show you something. So a couple of applications. By now it has become, we have 15 different groups in physics working on it. And actually, it's more mathematicians than just myself, so it's a big, big project. So in terms of physics in particular, there is a group working on acoustics, on the manufacturing the pianos. I'm serious, if you open the real grand piano, not the fake digital thing. So if you open the real one, there are like bars on the other side of the lid, or however you call it. And those bars are actually particularly shaped because they are meant to, work with the resonances. They are meant to make sure that your sound is what it's supposed to be. And what they do is they exactly localize acoustic vibrations coming from the strings of which your piano is made up. So there are people scientifically working on this who are actually work with manufacturers of pianos coming from these ideas. There are, the project with the Biloplation continues, the one I showed you with the big laser scene, which actually takes pictures of the vibrations to be designed, to use in the design of vibrating plates. So this particular one is the one in quantum physics, the one on with ultra-cold atoms. So this is actually a super cool idea from my personal point of view. They basically work with what they called ultra-cold atoms. It's basically a super cold system of Bose-Einstein condensate. But the main point of it is that on this system, the atoms behave the way you would mathematically think they should. Because in reality, in the presence of relatively hot structure, and by relatively hot I mean even cold, but the ones in which interactions matter, really your mathematical models are kind of far from reality. When you are working at the level 0, what you mathematically predict is pretty close to what's actually happening, and the magical thing, they can model it. It's completely amazing. You tell them, put an atom there, and one here, and they're going to, basically show the quantum states as they promised to, and they do. It's very amazing to watch. So we are working with these people on designing the potentials which would give the desired result. And then there is, so this is at, also at École Polytechnique in France, and this is the first team who observed Anderson localization experimentally in Bose-Einstein condensate. And yet another direction is design of light-emitting devices, LEDs, the blue light lamps, in University of California, Santa Barbara. And there again, it turns out that the efficiency of LEDs, and they are 20 times as efficient as the usual light, the efficiency of LEDs is in large part due to localization too. So basically, the quantum barriers, the material, looks approximately like this. And once again, they're kind of, as the engineers do, they pull it as a rabbit out of hat. I don't know how they figured it out. They don't know why it works. There is no study why it should work, but somehow it gives good results. So we are working right now on actually understanding why it works and things like this. And this is with UCSB. So this is the team at UCSB, which actually got Nobel Prize. Let's see, for blue LED, it was this year. I think it's the last Nobel Prize in blue LED. All right, and I'll probably finish here. Thank you.